Okay, hello. And this is Language Learning and Teaching Around the World, number 3. Okay, and my guest today, the special guest is Lindsay. He's from Canada. He has a master's in ESOL and a CELTA, and he's currently teaching at Prince Sultan University in Saudi Arabia. So welcome, Murray. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I look forward to our conversation.
So what can you tell us about your background and your interests? Who are you and why do you teach English?
Okay, so I'm just going to tell you just a brief outline of who I am. So my name is Murray. I'm 43 years old. I've been teaching ESL pretty much since 2001, July of 2001. So it's been 20 years. About 12 years was South Korea, 6 months was China, and about 7's been in Saudi Arabia. But the 20 years hasn't all been one consistent. I've taken little sabbaticals and breaks. For hobbies, due to COVID, I've gotten interested in my health, like going to the gym and lifting weights. And I'm also learning how to play the guitar. Nice. A big interest of mine has been just the last year, since I've been kind of financially independent, is learning more about stocks and bonds. Okay. But I'm not really into Bitcoin yet. Okay. So there was a big Bitcoin a couple of days ago in the news. So I'm kind of learning more about that. I'm into sports. So my favorite teams are the Toronto Blue Jays for baseball, the Raptors for basketball, LA Kings and Maple Leafs for hockey. Currently, I'm interested in reading books about true crime, like gangsters and biker gangs. So the reason why I'm here in Saudi Arabia and why I've been here for the past several years is that my goal is to retire in my late 40s or early 50s. And it looks like with my current job, which I've been employed for the past 26 months, is that this university job will probably be my last teaching job. So I'll probably like to hold on to that until I retire. As far as experiences, I've taught English in 3 countries, South Korea from 2001 to 2014 with little breaks in between, China in 2010, and Saudi Arabia since 2014. And I've traveled and lived in 13 different countries.
Cool. And can you tell us a little bit about your training in ESL?
Sure. So I feel like I did everything wrong. So if any people are watching this, don't do what I do the opposite. So I never got any training, TEFL training or CELTA training when I first started teaching in 2001. So I was probably the worst. I would probably get the Guinness Book of World Records being the worst, terrible, awful teacher of all time. So I would recommend to people who are interested in this field is don't buy the online TEFL degrees. They're bogus. They're bullshit. Invest the money in a CELTA or any type of teaching degree that you have in-class observations. It's money well spent, and it'll help you make money. Because I ended up getting my CELTA in 2015 after 12 plus years of teaching experience. So my CELTA tutor found out stuff that I'm good at, I'm very, very strong at. But unfortunately, I had some bad habits like teaching grammar and that kind of thing that I needed to work on. So I would recommend any people who are interested in the field to get a CELTA degree. Also, what I would recommend to people is in our field, if you're looking to make money, our field, really the Middle East is the only place where you can really make the big bucks. You have to love being in the classroom and love inspiring and teaching people. So if you're looking to make like a quick buck, I don't think the TEFL industry is that place. Go into IT or get a trade. But if you want to inspire people, help people acquire English for my example, my university students, I'm teaching a government program, and when they pass my course, they will get a promotion and a raise. So if you want to inspire people and help people accomplish their professional goals or personal goals like traveling, this is the field for you. Also too is I got my MA in ESOL from Fort Hays State University in 2013. So I did that while teaching a full course load at Youngdam University. That was a lot of work. I got it done in 18 months when a typical time is 2 years. And originally my Bachelor of Arts, originally my degree was a BA in journalism. So way back when I had hair and braces and glasses in my early 20s, I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be a journalist, for ESPN or TSN. My hero was Bobby the Brain Heenan from WWF, because he always claimed he was a broadcast journalist. So I always wanted to be a journalist. So when I was going through my university career with the goal of being a journalist, I had a campus radio show. I volunteered on the local Rogers channel, like learning how to film live events, which are mostly like political debates. And I was a sports editor of my university newspaper. So what happened is that I kind of realized that I had the perfect face for radio. Like it probably wasn't going to work out. So I was going to my last exam and I saw an ad next to the door I was going in. It said, teach English in South Korea with your fellow grad. Make $40,000 in 3 years. And as a 23-year-old kid, my student loans were $40,000. And I kind of burned myself out on the journalism field, just overstretching myself throughout my senior year. So I took the plunge and I ended up coming to South Korea in July 25th, 2001. And this is before Facebook, LinkedIn, social media. So I knew next to nothing about South Korea. The only thing I knew about it was the TV show MASH. And I rented a VHS cassette called Land of the Morning Calm. It was a 45-minute video about South Korea, like things to see and the national flower and that kind of thing. And I fell in love with teaching and fell in love with the vagabond lifestyle of being an expat. So that's how my career started.
And how would you compare living and teaching in Korea versus Saudi Arabia?
There's lots of different, there's not really very much that's the same. There's a lot of differences. So over here, like right now, it's late October. It's 10 in the morning when I'm talking to you, Jeff, and it's 37 degrees outside. So my assumption is that I've read online that Korea had a heat wave up to September. Like my old stomping grounds of Daegu had 25 degrees in the fall. But you guys have four distinct seasons. Winter, spring is very beautiful in Korea. Summer is very hot. And fall is very beautiful. Here, 10 months of the year, it's summer, but the summer is brutally hot here for 2 months, where it's like 45 to 50 degrees without the humidity. And then there's about a 6-week span where in the morning when you get up, it's kind of chilly, but then when the sun's up, it's back to like 15 to 20 degrees. So the weather is the biggest difference. As far as living here, I never really had to learn Arabic, just because in Saudi Arabia, of a country of 24 million, about 1/3 of the populations are expats. And most of the expats are immigrants from third world countries, such as India, the Philippines, and that kind of thing. So anywhere I go, like the tailor, the laundromat, supermarket, the people who bag my groceries, they're mostly third world immigrants. So the default language here is English. And I find a majority of Saudis know some basic form of English. So I never really had the urge to learn Arabic, but I know a basic greetings, goodbyes, over here, stop. As opposed to South Korea, where I learned to read the language very quickly, and I would have to use the language to communicate every day, because I would go several days without seeing a foreigner or without speaking English. So Korean, you needed to learn Korean to survive. Here in Saudi Arabia, you don't necessarily need to learn Arabic. It's a bonus if you do. And the third difference between the two of them is just the job market. In South Korea, I haven't been there since 2014, so I may be a little off, but mostly it's 80% academies. With that 80%, I think 90% are kids' schools like G&B, Mungkong, Kids Club, and maybe 10% are adults like YBM and Wall Street. Then you guys have, I heard you guys had public school jobs, but from what I've been reading online, they've been kind of cutting those. I don't think there's as many jobs in that field anymore, as opposed to when I was there. Epic.
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. I keep hearing different things. And also finally, the big enchilada was the university job. Most foreigners want a university job.
Right.
And when we go farther into our interview, I can tell you stories about back in the mid 2000s in the Wild West, where it was a lot easier to get a university job as opposed to 2021. With Saudi Arabia, we don't have kids academies here.
Okay.
The only jobs that I've ever taught at have been military contracts, which is basically the US government has an agreement with the Saudi government to teach Saudi males age 18 to 24 basic English in order them to go to Lackland Air Force Base or any Air Force base in the States to be trained as an airline pilot or a pilot mechanic, or university jobs, which I've had for the last 26 months, or these training programs for companies. There's the odd public school job, which I got an offer for about 2 years ago, but I turned it down for this job. So just off the top of my head, sorry for the long speech,
No,
but
no,
just off
it's
the top of my head, those are the three big differences I find between South Korea and Saudi Arabia, without even speaking about the lifestyle or the people or the nightlife.
And I'm curious about the actual living conditions. Do you live in a compound with other foreign teachers? Are you separate from the regular neighborhoods? How does that work in Saudi Arabia?
Okay, so my current job. Okay, so in Saudi Arabia, my university job provides me an apartment. It's a very spacious studio apartment. It's fantastic. It's something way better than I had in Canada. Before, when I worked for Blue Force, we lived on a compound, which was called Zamel. So if any people are listening to this, if you Google Zamel compounds in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, you should be able to find it. So all the English teachers who taught at Blue Force, we had 75 teachers plus 15 IT staff, all on one compound. And the compound also had expats that worked in the oil field. So I worked there, and my first job, I lived in shared housing with my first college job. So there were 4 of us packed into like a really big apartment. We all had our own room, but there was shared living spaces. Which is opposed to South Korea, where my university job at Yeongnam University for 3 years, they offered campus housing, but I found my own place and they gave me a stipend in lieu, which I've heard they're phasing out. They're phasing out stipends.
Yeah, where I'm at now, there is limited campus housing. Most of us just take the housing pay.
Stipend.
Yeah. So, how important is English in Saudi Arabia, and how does that affect your students' attitude and motivation?
Very important. So right now, Jeff, I work at Prince Sultan University, and there's 2 departments. One's PYP, which is a fancy word of saying sophomore, freshman students. I work in a department called Community Services. So we have contracts with the government. So I've taught military cadets, what they would come from their military base to my classroom. And right now I have 3 classes of government officials. So my morning class is focused on Ielts, because they're going to be doing their Ielts test in June. So the hope is to get them in a band score of between 5 to 7. Their speaking's great, but they need a lot of work with writing, just how to write well. And I'll have an outline. And in the afternoon, it's a general English program with students from the same government, but a different department. And it's basically like they need to learn English to get a promotion at work. So when they leave my class in the spring, if they stayed and passed, they would get a promotion and perks at their job. So it's very important. With the military contract, the Saudi government wants to send Saudis to the States in order to become more proficient with English, because pilot mechanic, the job itself has a lot of English phrases, like how to fix things and how to maneuver. So they need that. So English is quite important over here. But I find over here, they're exposed to it a lot more because of like Netflix and films. And a lot of my Saudi students have traveled outside of Saudi Arabia to like Greece, the Maldives, Europe.
And regarding the IELTS, do you have any tips for IELTS teachers or IELTS students?
Yeah. So basically what I've been doing with them, doing IELTS practice with them every week. So I make like a prototype of what their IELTS speaking test would be with the 3 parts. So I'm always telling them that for the part 1 is basically short answers. Just get your mind warmed up. Always try to give a reason why when you answer the question, because more detail is better than less detail. I find the IELTS, they want detailed answers because we want to see your vocabulary. We want to understand your comprehension. We want to see if you understand the topic. But what I'm doing now with my students is every unit in the book, I make an IELTS based off that. And then when they do their test with me this week, it will be one of the IELTS that we practice in class. But I have warned them, when they take their IELTS in June, it will be a random topic with very little preparation. So I'm basically, my IELTS class is focused on listening and speaking, while my co-teacher is focusing on the reading and writing. And what I've been doing is I've been bringing in extra listening and making worksheets, listening to the introduction, a couple of questions, and doing some predictive text. When you're listening to the introduction, what do you think is going to happen in the rest of the listening? Then they're listening for detail. So they're going to listen and fill in the reason why for certain parts. And the last part is just giving me their opinion on the listening.
And earlier, before we started recording, we were talking about misconceptions that people might have about Saudi Arabia. Do you want to touch on that again?
Yeah, sure. So I find when I go home back to Canada, because I'm from New Brunswick, Canada, a lot of people haven't been outside the province. When I tell them that I teach in Saudi Arabia, there's a gasp and there's a lot of misconceptions. They think it's a terrorist hub. They think that women have no rights, and they think it's a terrible, awful place to live. I can say that all 3 of those are very far off the mark. Women have this as much rights as men. Women have been driving cars since 2017 or 2018. Women go to classes. Women have this as much rights as men. The differences between the West and Korea as opposed to Saudi Arabia is Saudi Arabia is not run by a government official. It's run by a monarchy. So that's one thing. 2, the people here are extremely friendly. They're not conservative. They don't hate non-Muslims. They don't hate people that are Christians or anything like that. They're actually very curious. And 3rd is that the weather, fantastic. It's really hot in the summertime. So basically, we 10 months of the year summer weather. I find people here are wonderful. Most of them speak some English, and I find they're very curious. I found when I was in South Korea, Koreans were more reserved and shy, and I kind of feel like Saudi Arabia is kind of a better place to live in Korea. I found there was more overt cases of racism in South Korea I've ever experienced in Saudi Arabia. With South Korea, they always harp bitch about Japan, say a lot of ridiculous stuff, and I find that found experience that a lot of South Koreans don't foreigners marry and date. I find that they kind of puff out their chest and that they're South Asian country in the world, which they are great, but they kind of like to stay off on countries, and they kind of treat third world country people as well. Like people in South Korea do 3D jobs, dangerous, dirty, and something else. They kind of look down on them.
Deadly.
Deadly, yeah, deadly days and something else. Yeah. So they're different. They're not very similar. They're different.
Can you hear me okay?
From now, yes, yes, I can. So, and actually, something ironic is going to happen from now. South Korea coming to Saudi Arabia playing a football match next month. I don't know who to have my allegiance under.
So, what advice would you give English teachers with regard to money issues in terms of where to work and make money? And you talked a little bit about getting into stocks and so forth.
Well, so if you want to if you want like a great nightlife and a really good foreign community, this area, Keith and Gu was a 23-year-old kid, and it was a great experience in the world in Gu. They had softball, bowling. The foreign community was very tight. I noticed I left in 2014. The salary for most jobs has been the exact same as when I arrived in 2001. I think the average salary is still between 2.1, 2.3 million one. It has risen despite inflation going up in the last 20 years. Just to give you some context, my current job, I for 20 hours a week, so I teach 12 hours time. So my salary here is at least double what a university teacher is back in South Korea.
Wow.
So my salary is 500 Canadian a month for 32-hour week with free housing. And I remember even teaching with overtime at Youngdam University, my take-home pay after taxes is about 27 to 800. So there's just no real comparison, but it's a little more difficult getting a job here because one, they don't recognize online A's. Two, you don't have a degree like teaching, like a B in teaching, you'll have to get a CELTA with whatever your degree is, like journalism or something, in order to get there, and certain jobs requirements. So you would have to make sure the requirements of the job that you're looking for over here. But once you're here, like it's a great place. Like at current job in the IP department, I think there's 20 teachers there, and like half of them have been here 10, 12 years. They've been long term here, right? So once you get your foot in the door, if you can handle the no alcohol, no vibrant nightlife, it's actually a place to live. If you really have hankering for that and you really want to get down and dirty, you can take a flight to Dubai, to Bahrain.
So what's your average work week like teaching in Saudi Arabia?
So, our week here is Sunday to Thursday, Friday and Saturday are the weekends off. So my schedule is 8 a.m. to 11:45 a.m. is my first morning class them. And the afternoon class is 1:05 p.m. for a set. So yeah, but I have Mondays off. So I teach 4 days a week for 32 hours a week. And it's the class for currently I'm teaching a textbook called Elevate, which is quite good for beginner students with speaking and listening, but it's a little thin for reading and writing and grammar. And we use Unlock and Headway, but I find Headway is quite dense. Okay. And it's very it's just dense. That's the one thing I miss about South Korea is that you guys have a lot more variety with textbooks. Like I always liked Interchange, English Firsthand, those type of textbooks, because we don't really have a shop here where you can buy textbooks. You have to order them from the publisher, so it can get kind of pricey.
And what are the students like?
Very friendly, very open. They like there's no issue with doing speaking tasks in class as opposed to South Korea. South Korea was great, but they were more reserved. But here they like to speak, but the problem is that their spelling is atrocious. Their writing needs work because in Saudi Arabia, we go like we use subject verb. In Saudi, they use verb subject. And there's also other minor things like they don't have certain issues with us. Like for us, English is a Latin language that goes left to right. Arabic goes in reverse. Okay. And also, they don't really have upper or lowercase letters. So for me, I have to start from the very beginning with beginner students, like capital letters at the beginning of sentences, names of nouns, periods at the end. Also, too, is that they have problems with English because it's not phonetic. Like think of the word hot or month. It's not phonetic. Like sometimes there's silent letters. Right. So they also have difficulty with the verb to be, because I had to teach that last week. I am, he is, they are. Because they don't really have that in Saudi. They don't really have that in Saudi Arabia. And they don't really have the present tense, because there's no distinction here between actions completed in the past and actions completed in the past with a connection to the present. There's no real connection in their language with that. And the last thing difficulty that I have in classes is that in Arabic, they put the adjective after the noun rather than before. So I have to explain the difference with that. And also too is Arabic only has 3 vowels. So
Wow.
they have difficulty with the short and long vowels because we have 10 vowel sounds. They only have 3.
Yeah.
And there's no P or V sound in Arabic. And they
Huh.
they'll say the P and F instead. And the last thing is Arabic is a stress timed language. Well,
Right.
English is a syllable timed language, right? So they have issues with stresses in sentences. So that's kind of like the checklist that I have that I go through every class. Are you guys
Okay.
doing this, and this?
Yeah. Okay. And behind me, you can see a list of some words that we've borrowed from Arabic and English. So I guess there's a bit of a relationship there, alcohol and algebra and so forth. Do you have any special tips? We talked about Ielts, but in general for language learners or language teachers, for what makes a good teacher,
If you're
learner?
Well, I think what makes a good teacher is having a good rapport with your students is most important. You gotta have, because if you have a connection with them, it just makes the class run a lot better. For me, just from setting up your classroom, so I don't really set my classroom up in a horseshoe because there's too many dead spots in the corners or
Okay.
on the aisles. How I set my classroom up with my morning and afternoon classes, I set up like kind of like a cafe. So there'll be four desks and they're all facing each other, so they can have 3 opportunities to speak to someone in a speaking task.
Right.
And also they can hand their work so like if I get them to do a task, I'll get them to swap their paper and they have to check their partner's paper first. Then we'll all go as a group and check as a group. That's another thing. Always have more material than you need for class. So for me, I have a 3-hour class, so I try to have 4 hours worth of work, just so that it's better to have more than not enough. Because if you don't have enough, students can kind of tell that you're not really prepared.
Wow.
And I'm not really good with grammar. Like it's hard for me to explain. So just have the basic stuff that they need to know. And if they ask anything more complicated than that, just shut it down.
Yeah.
Get them to only focus on the add on because the student used and pushes away themes. Because I tell you prepared, pen your student workbook. You've got to be on time. So in the words Johnny Arger and Hell's Angels, if I'm 5 minutes early, I'm on time. If I'm on time, I'm late. So I always harp on them to be on time, right? Because if you're late, it takes you a few minutes to get into the flow of class.
Right.
And lost stuff, right? So those are the big things. And these are a lot of things that I didn't have any experience when I came in this field 20 years ago. I didn't know classroom management rules. I didn't know, I didn't have a good handle on seating arrangements. That was just all trial and error. But the career is very rewarding. Because of my 20 years, I have an MA, right? And I got my MA in 18 months. I consulted and I got it in my career. But the difficulty about ESL is that some people can't handle it abroad. You know what I mean? Some people can't handle it. Some people when I worked as a teacher, middleman for my military contract, we hired, I think, 150 people 1 year. That was way too much. We were blowing our budget on hiring people. And the average teacher, to hire them from their health checkup to their degrees to their flights, costs anywhere between 15 to 20 grand. And just couldn't handle it and would just leave after a month or two, right? So it became, our budget at Blue Forest was just huge, just to kind of keep the gravy train flowing with teachers coming into our program, because we needed 75 to be an efficient program. We were always short-staffed.
Wow.
Handle being alone at night. You got to be able to handle living in a foreign country. It's not like the Bill Murray film Lost in Translation. It's different. It's just different here. Like I really enjoyed. I never had homesickness or felt out of whack here in Saudi Arabia or South Korea, but a lot of people have. So I think that if a person decides to teach in China or South Korea or Saudi Arabia, and the fortunate thing is now, Jeff, it's 2021. You can use YouTube or
Right.
social media to find out stuff. Back in 2001, I didn't have that. I had to use the local library.
Right.
So like I was a fish out of water, and no two days were the same. Every day was different. Nothing was the same. And back then, I felt like a fork in a world of soup. Like it was so different.
Yeah, I came to Korea in 2009, a few years after you. And I didn't know very much about Korea when I came here either. There's a street in my town. It's called Pusan Road, Pusan with a P. It's in a little
Yep.
military neighborhood. So I didn't know much either. I was going to ask you about your students. Are they all or mostly from Saudi Arabia?
All of my students are Saudi, so I don't
Okay.
have any international students, just because that before I came in 2019, they kind of had a good foreign student community, but the Saudi government cut the grants and the money for that, so it's mostly Saudi students. But I don't teach in the university department. I teach in the community services, so we won't have international students. But that being said, if I were to transfer to PYP, I may have the odd international student, but right now that gravy train's kind of slowing down to a slow Peter.
Do you have any questions you want to ask me about my experience or teaching or anything related to ELT?
Yeah, so you've been teaching at a university for several years, so you probably had to go through a different way to get your job, right? Like the MA and the more competition, right?
Well, at my university, it might be required now, but having a master's, at least in the past, wasn't required. So some of my colleagues don't have masters. I got my master's a long time ago back in the US from Framingham State, where I was teaching. So I came to Korea with a master's. I started teaching in the EPIC program. I did that for a year. And then I taught at my current university for a year, and then I left and traveled and went back home for a little bit. And then I came back to Korea in the summer of 2013. But I do think having a master's in TESOL is helpful. But like you were saying, something like a CELTA with observations is definitely, I think, really important. I think observations, both being observed and observing, though maybe that experience is a little bit uncomfortable at first, once you get used to it, it's really, I think, beneficial. Because I know for me personally, though I like taking courses in ELT and reading books and whatnot, I think I learn a lot, maybe the most from observations and also from my own language learning experience, Spanish, Korean, etc. Just seeing what works and what doesn't, and having the experience of being a learner and developing or maintaining empathy for my own learners.
So did you ever work at a Hagwon?
Well, when I first started at this university, besides our university classes, we had to do some after school classes. So, well, there was an on-campus Hagwon here, so I taught there for a little bit, just a few classes, but not as a full-time Hagwon teacher. No, I know a lot of foreigners start out that way, and I imagine it's kind of challenging.
How did you end up picking the city where you're at? Like for me, back in 2001, it was a stab in the dark, and I just randomly ended up in Daegu for Mungkong English, and it was probably the best thing for me because it's the third largest city, but the
Right.
foreign community was very tight. And Moon Kong was a great place to work because it was the biggest franchise in Daegu, and all the schools, it was like a family. So they kind of adopted me and helped me get my footing in South Korea. I think if I went to Seoul or Busan, I probably would have washed out after a year or so because it was just too big. And Seoul was a very impersonal city. So I was very lucky that I landed in Daegu.
Well, when I first came here, I came with my brother, and my thinking was, though back home I don't like big cities, I was thinking, well, if I'm going to live overseas, and I hadn't lived overseas at that point, I had traveled a little bit, not very much, that I would want to be in a big city so I wouldn't be so isolated. And I thought, well, maybe Seoul is too big, so let's choose Busan. And we weren't guaranteed our selection, but that's what we asked for, and that's what we got. So I've been in Busan most of my 10 years or so in total here in Korea. I was in Daejeon for a year and a half, but mostly in Busan.
Have you ever taken the train to Daegu and check out Daegu?
I've been there, I think definitely once, maybe twice. We went to see a colleague playing and singing in a bar once. I think that was probably the only time I've been to Daegu that I remember. That was a long time ago, maybe a second time, but I've been to Seoul a bunch of times, but not recently.
Yeah, so I did like this, having this conversation, like this brings back like a flood of memories. Like I just feel very fortunate that I worked in Korea, and all the mistakes I made, I kind of whittled it down. So now I'm kind of like the peak of who I am as a teacher over here. Like this over the years, like I did the Tagwan Junior College University. Then over here in Saudi Arabia, I worked at a startup college. I've been a military I was promoted to like a head teacher. So that was a whole other ball of wax. Like that's a totally different than I ever thought it would be, because you're not really a teacher anymore. You have to critique people and keep people in line and encourage people. And that was a whole other ball of wax, 2 years doing that. And then I got burned out, took a year off, and then luckily I came here, and in the words over here, inshallah, God's will, hopefully I can keep this job until I feel like I'm able to retire.
So speaking of retiring, what are your future plans as far as teaching and then post-teaching? Or do you have any projects that you're working on?
I don't have any projects. Like I don't see myself going into another career. I'm 43, and for better for worse, the waves washed me into the ESL field.
Yeah.
So it's too late for me to drop out and go to a trade, because I'd be too far behind. But here, with my salary I make here, and this at the last 8 months investing my money, hopefully I could be able to retire in my late 40s, early 50s. And once I retire, I'm not going to be doing any online teaching. I'm just hopefully going to be, sipping on a Jack and Coke on the beach somewhere in Thailand. That's the ultimate goal. Like when I got burned out at my military job, I went back to St. John and worked at a call center job for a year.
Okay.
Or 9 months, and I just like the salary. The salary was a huge drop. It was just different. It didn't fit me. It wasn't against the people, and like it's just like, wow, I miss kind of being like the good things of being an expat. It's kind of like you're kind of like a movie star. Like you're like, you know what I mean? Like you're like you're the only, like for me, I'm the only foreigner in my neighborhood. I can remember in South Korea, they had the Asian Games in Busan in 2002.
Yeah.
So me and my Korean girlfriend went, and I had a Taekwondo jacket with my Korean Daegu Taekwondo on the back. And I got stopped inside watching the Taekwondo tournament, and Koreans came up to me and asked me if I was one of the Olympians. Yeah. So I signed autographs and got my picture taken, and I got gave my autograph at McDonald's and stuff like that. Like that was like, some people don't like that, but I really enjoyed that. Like that dish in a fishbowl kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in St. John, I was just some Joe Schmo.
When my brother and I were at the Great Wall of China, there were people coming up to us wanting to take pictures with us. you're at the Great Wall of China. Why do you care? Why do you want me in your picture? But that's what they were doing. Yeah, another aspect of teaching that I like is I just like the creativity that we're allowed in the classroom. And I like the challenge of helping people learn and trying to match what I'm trying to teach with what their needs are and trying to bring the two together. So I'm planning on teaching indefinitely, but it would be nice to be in a position to retire as far as finances are concerned sooner rather than later.
Like, Jeff, have you planted your flag into South Korea and like you're just going to stay there, or have you thought about trying like the Middle East?
No, I'm not set on staying in Korea. As a matter of fact, I was looking at teaching in China, but with what's going on now, it's just not a good time to move there. And I speak Spanish and Portuguese, so I would like to at least travel, if not teach in Latin America for a while. The Middle East, I mean, the attraction there, as you've mentioned, is the money. So, I mean, I'm older than you. I'm 49, so that does limit options and a little bit. Limit my options.
Yeah, for you and I don't know about the States, but for me, because I'm a non-resident in Canada, that there's no pension. So I have to create my own pension through my stocks and bonds. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the growth of it. I lived and worked in China for 6 months in 2010, working for Walt Disney English. And that was probably the worst job I ever had because it wasn't teaching English. It was kind of selling Disney products. That's what it felt like to me. Everything was Disney orientated. Like, so I made my own activities because it didn't have the Disney English logo. I wasn't allowed to bring it in. And the one thing I hated the most with the job was that I didn't mind demo classes because that's very popular in China to have demo classes for kids. But I had to read from a script. It had to be exactly from the script, word for word. And I can't be scripted. Like even if my lesson plans, I just have bullet points. I want to do this, this, and this, so I can improvise, right? So I improvised, and I think we got a student or two, right? But the manager was really upset because I veered off the script. So I didn't really like it. And also Walt Disney came when I worked there because it was a startup. They wanted to have 130 schools in China to coincide with the opening of Walt Disneyland in Shanghai and Beijing. And it just was a terrible job. They screwed around with the Z visas. They had a non-compete clause that they fired you without cause. You couldn't work for 90 days. You couldn't because you were a non-compete clause. And then they ended up going out of business, I think in 2019, I think. So Disney pulled the plug.
Oh, yeah. And I guess right now.
And also, I don't think and I don't think I can see myself going to China because unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of them, how they treat Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet. COVID came from there. I find they kind of bully and harass other countries. And also, too, unfortunately, once in a while, when I go onto TEFL.com or Dave's ESL or Serious Teachers, 90% of the jobs are with little kids. And I taught little kids in South Korea for part-time money. And it was fun going in and teaching song and dance and hanging out, but I couldn't do that every day for 40 hours a week. You need a different type of mindset teaching little kids, kindergartners, as opposed to Hagwon kids. With Hagwon kids, they're usually elementary, like grade 4 to grade 9. You can kind of relate to them, but with kids really little, like they may be scared of you, how you look. They may be shy, right? So you need a whole other mindset. You got to put a whole other working cap on teaching them. Did you ever teach younger kids like kindergarten before?
I had middle school students, maybe a little bit younger, just part-time. But I prefer adults. I prefer at least university students or adults, at least that age. People who at least have some personal motivation to learn. So.
Like with adults, like it's easier, like breakingnewsenglish.com has really good timely articles from the news you can bring in. You can just talk about your day. You can kind of gear the lesson toward session if you so choose. like you mentioned supplemental activities. With my current classes, I think about 30% of my lesson is supplemental and 70% from the book. Some people like to teach from the book. I like having a book, kind of like as a guide, but I like
Right.
having like a quarter of my material stuff of my own. But there's some people that don't like a textbook and just want to fly off the cuff, and that's good for them, but I couldn't do.
Yeah.
You need it for, you need a road, right? A highway. You don't have a book, you're just veering off the different sides of the road.
Yeah, I prepare my own material based on the book topics, the topics from the books. But generally, I have the students use the books for their homework. I just find that works better, especially if you have a book that's not high quality, which is the case with some of the books that we have. So do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you want to talk about for?
Yeah, so I just want to say to people who are listening to this is that the ESL feels a very fulfilling career. It may not be financially fulfilling, but it could be fulfilling if you help people progress and attain their English goals. And if you have any worries that you could be a terrible teacher, just look at me. Like, I was the worst teacher of all time when I first arrived in 2001. I had no concept of anything. I was short with my students. I didn't have a good plan when I came in the classroom. But if you looked at me, I took incremental steps throughout my career. I went from English Academy to a junior college in 2005. And back then, all you needed was a BA, not an MA. And it was more like the Wild West. Like, if you knew someone there, you can kind of get your foot in the door. And now with 2021, I'll give you an example. My university here, we hired 4 teachers over the summertime. We had 160 kids. So that gravy train's long gone in South Korea as well, with getting into the university job. I was very lucky. Like, everything that happened with my career was before it got really regulated and very strict. Like from 2005 to 2011, when I ended up getting my 3 university jobs, it was so much easier. And there wasn't that, like, you got to have an MA or you got to have a CELTA. And also, too, the last thing I'll mention is that, like, I got my fill of South Korea, but because of South Korea, I got the skills to do my job and do it well. And then I ended up getting promoted after 6 months of my military contract as kind of like a head teacher for a group of 15 to 30 teachers. And that was a whole totally different ball of wax. But because of South Korea, because of now, I owe a lot of debt of gratitude to going to Korea that July 25th, 2001, and a hot, humid Daegu night.
Wow. Well, Murray, it was great to meet you and chat with you. I hope we can do it again. And I appreciate all of the experience and expertise you've been able to share with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jeff. And I just hope that people can glean something from our conversation.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, take care.